The lights inside the studio of The Tonight Show, starring Jimmy Fallon, glowed bright enough to make everything feel cheerful. The band had just finished playing. People in the audience were laughing. Cameras moved smoothly across smiling faces stage. Managers whispered into headsets. Another normal night in television. And then everything changed. Because halfway through the monologue, a woman slowly stood up from the third row. At first, almost nobody noticed her. She was not loud. She was not shouting. For attention, she did not wave her arms or interrupt the show. She just stood there silently, holding a firefighter helmet against her chest. The helmet looked old, worn-scarred by heat and smoke. Even from the stage, Jimmy Fallon could tell this was not ordinary. The audience slowly quieted down as Jimmy looked toward her. For a second, everyone assumed it might be part of a planned segment. Maybe a surprise reunion. Maybe a charity story. Maybe one of those emotional moments. Late-night television sometimes. Prepares in advance, but then the woman spoke, and the entire room fell silent. My husband was supposed to be here tonight. You could actually hear people stop breathing. Jimmy's smile disappeared instantly. The camera zoomed in carefully. The woman looked, nervous like standing there, took every ounce of strength she had left in her body. Her hands trembled around the helmet. And then people noticed the black mourning band wrapped around the badge. Every firefighter in the audience understood immediately what that meant. Someone was gone. Jimmy stepped closer to the edge of the stage. His voice became softer. "What is your name?" The woman swallowed hard before answering. "Rachel Reeves." Jimmy nodded gently. "And your husband?" For a moment, she could not speak. The audience waited quietly. Finally, she whispered, "Daniel." Then she looked down at the helmet again. "Firefighter Daniel Reeves." The room felt completely different now. No laughter, no movement, just silence. Rachel explained that Daniel had served with Engine Company 14 for over 12 years. He was not famous. He was not decorated with medals all over his uniform. According to her, he was simply the guy everyone called when things got bad. The audience listened carefully. Rachel said, "Daniel loved helping people long before. He became a firefighter. When they first met, he worked construction during the day and volunteered at a local rescue station during weekends. He used to say he hated standing still while other people suffered." Jimmy lowered his head slightly. Rachel continued, "3 weeks ago, there was an apartment fire downtown. A few audience members already looked emotional. The building was collapsing before crews even arrived. The studio became painfully quiet." Rachel explained witnesses heard a child screaming from somewhere on the 4th floor. Smoke covered the hallway so heavily, firefighters could barely see their own hands. Parts of the ceiling had already started falling. People outside were yelling that nobody could survive inside. But Daniel heard the crying and he ran in anyway. Rachel's voice cracked. His captain told him not to go deeper. She paused. He went anyway. Nobody in the audience moved, not one sound. He found the little girl trapped behind a bedroom door. Rachel tightened her grip on the helmet. He carried her through the smoke all the way back toward the stairwell. Jimmy looked completely frozen, listening to her. Then Rachel said the sentence that shattered the room. The ceiling collapsed before he could make it out. Several people gasped. One woman, near the front, instantly covered her mouth with both hands. Rachel nodded slowly. The little girl survived. Tears filled her eyes. My husband did not. Silence swallowed the studio whole. Jimmy walked away from his desk without speaking. For a moment, the cameras did not even know where to focus, because nobody expected this. Nobody prepared for it. This was not television anymore. This was grief. Standing under bright studio lights, trying not to collapse. Jimmy walked down directly toward Rachel, not as a host, not as a celebrity, just as another human being. When he reached her, he spoke quietly. "I am so sorry." Rachel nodded politely, but her expression looked exhausted in a way that words cannot describe, like she had not truly slept since the day Daniel died. Jimmy gently asked if she would feel comfortable joining him on stage. The audience immediately applauded softly, not loud cheering, just encouragement. Rachel hesitated for a second before slowly walking toward the stage, still holding the helmet. And as she walked down the aisle, people began noticing the damage on it, burn marks across the sides, scratches on the face shield, a visible crack near the top. This was not a clean ceremonial helmet. This helmet had gone into fire. Jimmy pulled a chair beside his desk instead of across from it. That small detail made several people emotional immediately. He was not interviewing her. He was sitting beside her. Rachel carefully placed the helmet on her lap. Jimmy looked at it quietly for a second, then asked softly, "Was this the one he wore that night?" Rachel nodded. Yes, her voice almost disappeared. Jimmy did not speak for several seconds. The audience stayed completely silent. Finally, Rachel smiled weakly through tears. "He loved your show." Jimmy looked surprised. He watched. Every night after shift, some people in the audience smiled sadly. No matter how exhausted he was, he would sit on the couch eating terrible microwave dinners, laughing at your jokes. Jimmy laughed quietly through emotion. Rachel shook her head slightly. He said laughter made hard days survivable. That line hit the audience hard, because suddenly Daniel did not feel like a distant headline anymore. He felt real, a husband, a father, a tired firefighter sitting on a couch late at night trying to forget the terrible things he had seen all day. Jimmy asked if they had children. Rachel nodded again. "A son. What is his name?" "Mason." "How old?" 6. The audience collectively melted. Rachel smiled sadly. "He still thinks his dad is coming home after work." Jimmy closed his eyes briefly. Rachel explained that Mason keeps running to the front window every evening around sunset, because that was usually when Daniel came home from shift. He waits there holding a toy fire truck. Now people throughout the studio were openly crying. Rachel laughed. Painfully, he even makes siren noises when he sees headlights outside. Jimmy covered his mouth, but every night it is someone else's car. The silence afterward felt unbearable. Rachel then revealed something nobody expected. She said Daniel had a habit of writing letters, birthday letters, anniversary letters, Christmas letters, and one emergency letter. Jimmy looked stunned. Rachel slowly reached into her purse. The audience immediately understood what was happening. She pulled out a folded piece of paper worn, soft from being opened too many times. Jimmy gently said, "You do not have to read that, if it is too difficult." Rachel looked down at the paper, then shook her head. No, her eyes filled again. People should know who he really was. The room became completely motionless. Rachel unfolded the letter carefully because her hands were trembling. Then she began reading, "To my little boy." The audience immediately broke emotionally. Rachel paused to steady herself. "If you are hearing this someday, it means I could not come home." Jimmy stared down at the floor silently. "I need you to understand something." "Mason," Rachel's voice cracked harder. "Being brave does not mean you are not scared." Tears rolled down her face. "It means someone else matters more than your fear." Several audience members cried. Openly now, even crew members behind the cameras looked emotional. Rachel continued reading. "I became a firefighter because I wanted strangers to survive the worst day of their lives." Her voice nearly collapsed completely. "But being your father was the greatest thing that ever happened to me." Jimmy wiped tears from his eyes. The audience looked devastated. Then came the line nobody in the room would ever forget. "When people call me a hero." Rachel stopped reading for a second because she physically could not continue. Jimmy gently placed a hand over his heart. She inhaled shakily and kept going. "They are wrong." The room remained silent. Heroes are the people who keep loving after loss. Rachel looked toward the audience through tears. "Your mother is the hero." That moment, Rachel completely broke down crying. Not quiet tears anymore, real grief, the kind people tried desperately to hide in public. Jimmy immediately stood up and hugged her tightly, while the audience applauded through tears. No one cared about cameras. anymore. No one cared about television. It felt like the entire studio simply wanted to hold this grieving woman together somehow. But the night still was not over. Because before the show began, Jimmy Fallon had secretly arranged something Rachel knew nothing about. He looked toward backstage, then quietly said, "There are some people here tonight who asked if they could see you." One by one, firefighters walked onto the stage. Full-dress uniforms, boots, echoing softly across the floor, badges shining beneath. Studio lights, nearly 20 members of Engine Company 14 surrounded Rachel silently. The audience instantly stood up, not screaming, not clapping wildly, just standing in respect. Rachel covered her face, crying harder the moment she saw them. One older captain stepped forward, holding a folded American flag. Jimmy asked softly if he wanted to say something. The captain nodded. His voice sounded rough, like he had not slept much either. Daniel Reeves was the kind of firefighter you pray sits beside you on the truck. The audience listened silently. He never walked away from danger. The captain smiled sadly, and he never let anybody carry pain alone, Rachel cried quietly beside him. The captain then revealed something emotional. Every firefighter from Engine 14 had written personal letters for Mason stories about Daniel, funny moments, rescue calls, acts of kindness. Nobody else knew one. Firefighter described Daniel buying groceries for a family after a house fire destroyed everything they owned. Another told a story about Daniel spending his entire Christmas Eve fixing an elderly woman's broken heater because she could not afford repairs. He never told anyone these things. The captain said because he did not do them for praise. The audience applauded emotionally. Then the captain turned toward Rachel. "We wanted Mason to grow up knowing exactly who his father was." Rachel nodded through tears, unable to speak. But then came the moment nobody expected. The captain looked toward backstage and quietly said, "There is one more person here tonight." A small girl walked carefully onto the stage holding her mother's hand. The audience gasped instantly. Rachel froze completely. Jimmy looked emotional before the girl even reached them. The captain explained softly, "This is Lily, the little girl Daniel saved from the fire." Rachel immediately burst into tears again. Lily looked nervous at first. Then she slowly walked closer and hugged Rachel tightly. The entire audience completely lost composure. Even Jimmy Fallon openly cried. Now, Lily's mother explained that her daughter still talked about the firefighter with the brave eyes. She said Lily had nightmares after the fire for weeks, but every night before sleeping she prayed for Daniel's family. Then Lily whispered something into Rachel's ear that microphones barely captured. "My mommy says your husband gave me my whole life back." There are moments when words stop working. Was one of them. People throughout the audience were crying openly without embarrassment, because suddenly this was not about tragedy anymore. It was about sacrifice, about love, about the impossible weight carried by families left behind. Jimmy finally asked Rachel one final question. "What do you want people to remember most about Daniel?" Rachel looked down at the helmet resting in her hands. She gently touched the burn marks across the side. Then she smiled through tears. He was not fearless. The room stayed silent. He was afraid every single time. That surprised people. Rachel nodded slowly. "He told me once that anybody who runs into fire without fear is either lying or crazy." A few emotional laughs escaped the audience, but he believed people were worth being afraid for. Jimmy lowered his eyes again. Rachel continued softly. He was not trying to become a hero. She looked toward Lily standing beside her mother. He just did not want somebody else's child to die alone. Silence filled the studio once more. No music played, no commercial interruption happened, no jokes came next because nobody could return to normal after hearing that. The audience stood together as firefighters surrounded Rachel and Lily near center stage. Jimmy Fallon remained beside them quietly, not speaking, just honoring the moment. And somewhere beyond the cameras, millions of people watching from home sat silently in living rooms across the country. Some hugged their children tighter. Some cried. Some stared at their television, unable to move. Because that night, a grieving wife walked into a comedy show carrying a burned firefighter helmet. But what people truly witnessed was proof that courage survives death. Sometimes courage becomes stories. Sometimes it becomes memories. Sometimes it becomes a 6-year-old boy waiting at the window for headlights that will never arrive again. And sometimes it becomes a woman standing beneath bright studio lights, holding the last piece of the man she loved, refusing to let the world forget his name. Firefighter. Daniel Reeves. Husband. A father. A man who walked into fire so somebody else could walk back out, and long after the audience finally stopped crying. Long after the cameras shut off. Long after the applause faded into silence, one image remained in everyone. Mine forever, a grieving wife, holding a scarred firefighter helmet against her heart like she was still holding him.